Yes, thank you. Thank you, girls. Thank you very much also for all the work behind the workshop. Um, well, first, it was very interesting to listen to a horny Schmitt. it, um, it was an interesting metaphor. But I wanted to concentrate on the very concept of nomos. The first thing, at least in the part we agreed to read. Well, it doesn't matter. I think we took different passages and different pages. I think, but I concentrated, or at least I will speak about the very definition of what is nomos, and the relationship between nomos and earth, because what I heard right now from Cesar is that there is some kind of naturalism, but I would argue against that, and I would like to show that the idea of nomos is very closely related to Husserl's idea of institution, Stiftung, and origin, Ursprung in Heidegger. But before coming to that, the main point, or if you want, the Leitfaden, is what does it mean, the nomos? He's very careful at the beginning of the paragraph we're discussing, to say it's not the law, it's not gazettes. He says that, but nonetheless there is some relationship to law, and how to interpret this. And my suggestion is that we have to go back to two thinkers. One is Weber, and the other is Hegel. In political theology too, he very clearly refers to Hegel and to the Encyclopedia of Philosophical Sciences, in which he says that there is a moment of absolute freedom, and we could say sovereignty, in ethicity, that is in Sittlichkeit, in the very moment in which we shift from the national and contingent content of people, of the folk, into the universal form of the state. But he's not saying, I mean, at least the reading of Schmitt is not that there is something like an elevation above the particularities of the people, of the folk, but rather on the contrary, that the state elevates the content of culture and of folk into its most general form as self-determination. And self-determination is absolute spirit. And this doesn't take place in universal history, but in very particular nations within the context of universal history. To put it in other terms, the act of absolute sovereignty and freedom of the spirit for Hegel is the state. And I think this is the part in which this is the part that interests Schmitt the most. So the first my first idea is to read the idea of nomos very closely to the Hegelian idea of Sittlichkeit. That is my first suggestion. But the second one, because he's actually saying in this political theology too, that the content, the context in which he's reasoning is actually the philosophy of spirit of Hegel and the role the state plays in the objective spirit. The other suggestion, or the other path we could follow, is to read the concept of nomos together with that of ethics and Spiritgeist in general from Max Weber. Why? You know this very famous text about the spirit of capitalism and the Protestant ethics, and he's very ambiguous, because he says that he's not going to define what is spirit, what is the Geist, and he's also not saying what is ethics. But there are some hints that the concept of ethics really is related to the concept of Sitten. And Sittlichkeit from Hegel, but also from spirit in the sense of that particularity of some people that gives them some openness to the world and some structure which is absolutely spiritual. That is, he goes against the grain and against the Marxist politics and philosophy, both Schmitt and Weber, in which they're trying to show that it's not material forces what drives history, because it has happened other times that you have accumulation or even greed, but there is something spiritual that guides history. And this spiritual dimension is called Sittlichkeit in Hegel. It's called Geist or spirit in Weber. And I think, this is my hypothesis, should be read as Nomos. But there is something else, because Schmidt's not only interested in showing, some sort of changes in history, those breaks in which something new emerges, but he wants to show the very origin of the political and the very origin of the legal universe. So he says, I would say that the concept of nomos is related to the moment of institution of spirit, institution of Sittlichkeit. What's the idea behind? He says there is something like the earth, and the earth is really not nature. It really, I liked what Andreas was saying, because it's really not some indifferent nature. It's more like a woman waiting to be taken, right? Because the word he uses is Landnahme. You have to take it, and you cannot take what is not given to you in some sense. I mean, you could say that it's a whole fantasy to think that you can really possess and take possession of the earth, because you don't do that. The only thing you do, if you take possession of some territory against someone else, excluding someone else, and defining the whole dimension of the political as enemy and friend or foe. So the moment of the institution is not the appropriation of nature, is the appropriation of some already at hand, some earth at hand. So he says, with the appropriation of territory comes law, because you can only reign in a particular part of the world. But at the same time, when you take this territory, you make a law for it, and then just after that, then you can, so to speak, divide the territory. I mean, politically and sociologically and in classes, whatever you want. But you, so to speak, divide the territory and say who belongs to which part, for example. And then once you define that, you give access to that differences, different types of people who have different access to the land, and then you can take care and dwell in that space. So the earth is not nature, and I think that's very important to understand. It's not some part of the world that does not belong to human history. On the contrary, it's more like, in a very helomorphic scheme, matter waiting to receive form from the outside, and form from the outside it's imposed by a subject, and this violence of the subject makes possible the birth of the folk, and the birth of the folk as being part of the world. So the first thing is the earth is not nature. That's one thing. The second thing is that nomos is an act of subjective decision. It's institution, but it's at the same time material and subjective. It's like taking body of the subject through the earth. Now, that was the first point. Now, the second thing I would like to draw upon is the idea that there is a tension between earth and water, or between land and water, or sea and land. Here in this very text, and also in Land and Sea, he also tackles the question of how there is in his worldview of political theology, there is a fall. I mean, after the Westphalia peace, there was this origin of a territory called Europe, inside which law could regulate relationships between different states, and outside, because they took it. That's the Landnahme, the original Landnahme. But outside, there is no law, and that's why you have the right to conquer and destroy and kill everything not belonging to the original territory of Europe. But this is so to speak the part of original appropriation. I will 1 minute. But the second part is there is a fall, and the history of the fall in history is how we betray the earth and how we betray land, and we cede to the seducing powers of the sea. And he quotes in the in the last part, the afterword of the Nomos of the Earth. It's like one page, I think, and there's a quote on Hegel's philosophy of right, saying something. I don't have it here, or maybe yes. Well, I will just say a couple of I will read a part of the quotation of Hegel's philosophy of right in paragraph 247. He says, "As the firm set earth or the soil is the basis of family life, so the basis of industry is the sea." So you can see, and you can read probably the idea that there is a relationship between capitalism, globalization, if you want, and the sea. Why? Because the natural element which stimulates intercourse with foreign lands is the sea. That is, we leave the soil and the limited round of appetites and enjoyments embraced within the civic life for the fluid element of danger and destruction. The passion for gain is transformed, and Hegel concludes, all the great aspiring nations press to the sea. So, really, what Schmitt is calling to is to stop the fall, and the fall is the sea. And the only way to save us from the apocalypse, I mean, the katechon, the figure of the katechon, is to come back to land and to deploy civic life as it reigned in the old Europe. But, and I conclude, the problem is, this is the fantasy, and I would pretty much agree upon what Andres was saying. There is an absolute fantasy of the return of the powers of the earth against the power of the sea, but there is an additional problem, and this is where I touch very slightly upon metaphors. We are really not, or our current metaphor is neither land nor water, but air. Information and the net, and we speak about the cloud and data and information. There's actually a complication in which it becomes even more difficult to integrate land and sea, because there is this dimension of air. But I will leave it here. Thank you very much, and I hope we can discuss these ideas a little bit more. Thank you. Yeah, I think my suggestion to read Schmitt through the eyes of Weber was to put him in the context of the criticism of 19th sort of century Germany and the unification. Because I pretty much think that when you see that he's not arguing anymore, that he's not giving, reasons on why the earth would be superior in some sense, you have to go back not only to previous writings of his, but especially to Weber and his criticism of German society after unification as Entzauberung. You know, the recourse to myth is needed, and it's explainable only in the face of the disenchantment of the world. And that's a concept of Weber. The other element of Max Weber is the rationalization of the world, which means a very fast, or a change at a very fast pace from the old Germany based in some social and religious structures into the world of capitalism, to reach the rest of European nations. So Germany plays pretty much, I'm not saying that it is, but it plays pretty much the place that the third world played in the 20th century. That is, to be forced to industrialization and capitalism very fast, and to suffer the destruction of the old world of values. So that's why also the main problem of Weber and of Nietzsche, and eventually for Schmitt, is values, because value is like the last resort to save us from the objectivation of the world. But at the same time, once values oppose or are opposed to the world, to the material world, they lose also their power. Because once you say that you have to value the world, and the only human or what is left in us of subjectivity is valuing the world, at the same time you sever yourself from objectivity, and then you run into nihilism or into some sort of cynicism. And I think the Nomos of the Earth is an attempt to ground the subjective decision in the materiality of the world, in the actuality and concretion of the world. And only there, and only for that reason, you can understand why he's opposing earth and sea. Because, you see, Weber thinks that it's not the rationalization of the world and the power of technology and science upon the world and every corner of life is called capitalism. It's not only the state, it's not liberal modern state, it's also capitalism. And the sea stands as the metaphor of capitalistic nations, like, and above all, England. Right? So when you have, if you think of music, Wagner is writing music about German myths, while English composers are writing to the planets and the sea. Think, for example, in Vaughan Williams' A Sea Symphony. It's a symphony not dedicated to human spirit, but to the sea. Or in Turner, right? This romantic painter. Or even later, okay, I will not deviate, but those are the points. So the opposition to capitalism is really not that clear in Schmitt, because he's opposing, so to speak, the side of the state, of the liberal state, and positivistic law. And that's why myth plays the important role of invoking a leader capable of giving and providing sense, Sinn, in an originary fashion. And that demands to go back to earth, to go back to traditions, and go back to, so to speak, the Geist of the German people and the Sittlichkeit upon a certain territory. But so far, that's what I can say. It seems to me, and I would love to hear your opinion, it seems to me that you said something very, very crucial, which is, I think Schmitt is aiming at the absolute. That is, but at the same time, his position is aiming at the impossibility of reaching the absolute, because it has to be grounded on nothingness, in the Abgrund. So, to which extent, I would ask to you, do you think that the idea of absolute decision he's actually covering up the impossibility of the absolute, because he's saying that in order to achieve plenitude, you have to be grounded in the opposite of plenitude, which is nothingness, which is ex nihilo. So in this very moment in which the subject, as pure spirit, asserts itself beyond nature and naturalization of the world, as it happens in the liberal order, this immediately lacks reality, and it becomes pure valuing of the world. And that is why he tries to resort to some sort of concreteness of the world by speaking of the earth. But at the same time, the idea of nomos goes against all type of normalization and of all type of nature, because he mines, so to speak, the same ground he's looking for. Because if on the one hand he's looking for the earth and values and the civic life, at the same time the state asserts itself through the power of the sovereign, despite the contents of the wills of concrete people. So in this sense, that is my question. I don't know what you think. It seems to me that his absolute is really tragical, because it's a subject insisting on a subjectivity, looking for some content, but denying all possibility of content. And this is why it becomes so violent, because this just can lead to an empty act of violence, which would give reason to Hegel to this, when he says even evil is better than nature, because at least there is a spirit, and spirit is always superior to nature. But thank you, I like it very much.